Proponents? Seeing none, opponents to House Bill 513.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Kyla Mackey. That's M-A-K-I. I'm with the Montana Environmental Information Center. I have some handouts, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Each handout has, it was said that this is a simple bill, and it may be in length, but it has major implications. We believe this bill is a retaliation against the public for exercising their right to know and participate in government decisions. Exempting oversized loads from MEPA takes away a crucial and oftentimes the only tool that the public and local governments have to know when MDT is permitting large loads that could significantly impact them. It bars the public from participating in government decisions. This bill also strips away the public's right to know about massive transportation projects and impacts these projects could have on their safety, the economy, cultural resources, roadway infrastructure, and the environment. This bill is also legally questionable. It raises some very serious legal questions. Most specific is that it specifically exempts one purpose from MEPA. For the most part, exemptions from MEPA so far have been ministerial and administrative in nature. This bill goes much beyond that. That a whole category of permitting is completely exempt from MEPA. MEPA's intent, and it was talked about a little bit today, but I think the drafters of MEPA wouldn't be surprised that the public was exercising their right to participate in government decisions. And MEPA's intent is to implement the constitutional right to know and our constitutional right to a clean and healthful environment. And I'll read that section of the code, the MEPA. The legislature, mindful of its constitutional obligations under Article 2, Section 3, and Article 9 of Montana's Constitution, has enacted the Montana Environmental Policy Act. The Montana Environmental Policy Act is procedural, and it is the legislature's intent that the requirements of Parts 1 through 3 of this chapter provide for adequate review of state actions in order to ensure that environmental attributes are fully considered by the legislature in enacting laws to fulfill constitutional obligations. I think that the words and the language in this bill and exempting it from MEPA, I think that the danger of this specific action is summarized well by a former Montana Mining Association lobbyist who said that exempting specific actions from MEPA leaves you naked to the Constitution. Those are some of the legal issues with this bill. In the overwhelming majority of cases, MDT has gone no further in an environmental review than categorical exclusion analysis. And the first handout that I have for you is the simple checklist that most loads, I would say the vast majority of loads of overweight and oversize, go through at the Montana Department of Transportation. And they go through the checklist, and if a certain number of boxes are checked yes, then in some cases they may do further review, but in most cases they do not. These are questions such as whether there will be more than 50 loads, whether the proposed actions would permanently change the physical features or characteristics of the route, etc. If the applicant, like I mentioned, checks one or more of these boxes, then there is potentially further environmental review. Again, just doing the checklist is the majority of cases that come before MDT. Doing anything further than a checklist and categorical exclusion is according to former Director Lynch, most oversized 32J permits are granted without the public participation that an EA requires, such as categorical exclusions. And so we see that most of these permits aren't subject to further environmental review. But in this case, this was clearly an extenuating circumstance. HB 513 would ensure that MDT would not even do the simple checklist, no matter how large or how many loads or to what extent modifications need to be made to the highways to accommodate these loads. In the case of the KMTP and in imperial loads, the MEPA review above the checklist or categorical exclusion analysis was invoked for two reasons. One, the extreme number of loads that were going to be traveling down the highway. Two, the significant changes to the state and federal highway infrastructure required to safely allow for passage of these massive loads. The first phase of this project said that there were over 200 loads that weighed over 150 tons and were 120 feet long and 30 feet high. The KMTP was clearly a unique circumstance that required further review. And in fact, and you'll look at the second handout that has a presentation in July of 2009 when many people first heard of the proposed transportation project, the KMTP, from Director Lynch. The director of MDT said that Exxon was proposing to create a permanent high and wide corridor and that it would likely require a more thorough environmental impact statement than a categorical exclusion or environmental analysis. In addition to the sheer size of these loads, they required major highway modifications. And if you look at the back of the second page on that presentation, the project required nearly 654 utility modifications and relocations, moving 28 overhead obstacles identified as needing modifications removal, including signals, signs, bridges, utility lines, and poles. And additionally, 53 new football-sized turnouts would need to be constructed along the entire route. This clearly was not your typical transportation project. It completely would have transformed a two-lane highway and its current use. If you lived along the proposed route, you certainly would want to know when, for how long, and how extensive construction and oversized load movements would be taking place. You would also want to comment on a proposed project if it would have significant impacts on your private property rights, safety, and ability to use the highway. If HB 513 passes, you would not be able to find out important information that relates to your own safety or to comment on potential impacts to you and your private property rights. On page 1, line 18 of the bill, it says that the permits must be in the public interest. How do we know what the public interest is if the public is barred from finding out more information through the MEPA process? It's important to remember that MEPA guarantees a process and not a result. With the changes that have been made to MEPA over the last several sessions, particularly the changes made in the last legislative session, MEPA is little more than a public participation document, and that participation continues to be limited, and HB 513 limits it even further. Most transportation projects are very routine, don't require significant changes to existing infrastructure, and would not compromise public safety. The KMTP project was clearly different. In this case, the problem was not the requirement that there was a MEPA analysis. It was people living along Highway 12, 200, 287, and 89 would have no idea how long they would have to deal with oversized loads traveling along the highway. And these are sent the environmental analysis back to MDT. There were legitimate safety concerns raised by the public in over 7,000 comments submitted to MDT on the KMTP. Many of these concerns focus on impacts to safety. If there was an emergency, a life and death situation, and individuals were blocked by one of the loads that could not make it to the hospital on time. Also, there were impacts on cultural resources. The Nez Perce and CSKT tribe joined the lawsuit because of the concerns related to cultural interests. Particularly, the loads could impact the historic Nez Perce Trail and Lewis and Clark used to move westward. Mitigation of these concerns were not addressed in the environmental analysis prepared by MDT. After several months in public pressure, MDT did develop an emergency response plan. That would not happen if HB 513 had been the law at the time because the public would not have the chance to review the permit application or even a simple checklist. And in your final two handouts, I just want to point and focus on the fact that these aren't just potential impacts, but they're real impacts. The April 13th Missoulian article that talks about the test module for the KMTP project coming through and cutting power to 1,300 homes. And it's not just about the lights going out for an hour. This is a really serious safety issue. There's also a December 2012 Rural Montana, that's the Rural Electric Cooperatives magazine article that I handed out, that it talks about how the large loads in eastern Montana are causing issues and creating problems for co-ops because they're not knowing when to plan for these large loads to come through. It seems like every time the public exercises their right to know and participate in government decision-making, and government agencies fail to do their job, and the legislature retaliates by putting up another roadblock in the name of economic development. Sacrificing the public's right to know for one-sided economic development doesn't seem like a fair trade to me. Retaliation efforts like HB 513 will not result in economic development. What they will result in is less public access to government decision-making, constitutional challenges, and even worse, real impacts to public safety, cultural resources, other businesses, and the environment. For these reasons and many others, I strongly urge you to table HB 513. I'll be available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Mackey. Other opponents, 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Linda Stahl. I'm here on behalf of Missoula County. I will be very quick. Missoula County does oppose this bill. Transport of oversized loads and construction of facilities to allow such transport may have significant impacts on public safety, environmental quality, economic and cultural resources, and I'll skip through some of my testimony here in light of the time. There are often better ways to get the job done, better routes to take for transport, and this review process that these 26 words will strike oftentimes helps identify better alternatives. As most of you already know, Missoula County opposed the large-scale transport of oversized loads over Lolo Pass along Highway 12 and up the Blackfoot River Valley in Highway 200 in Missoula County. Missoula County prevailed in that litigation through the process that is being proposed to be eliminated here. Alternative routes were found that did not have the same negative impacts on the citizens and the environment. Missoula County does not oppose the lawful transport of loads on these alternative routes. We believe that it is a big mistake for the legislature to throw out this review process that can make, in the long run, projects better to protect the aquatic resources, to ensure public safety, and benefit the citizens. We urge you to vote no on this bill. Thank you.
Is there any time?
Other opponents? Yes, you do have 2 minutes, I believe.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Janet Ellis, E-L-L-I-S, and I represent Montana Audubon, and I do have a handout for the committee, with your permission.
Go ahead.
It's okay, Janet. I'll run. I'll keep my testimony brief, but I am passing around a sheet that has a list of the current exemptions. There are currently 17 exemptions from MEPA. And if you spend any time and look at those exemptions, and we don't have time to get into that now, but they're pretty narrow. This one is very, very broad compared to any of the current exemptions from MEPA. And I heard from the proponents that there's a problem with the permits process with MDT. I would suggest that you ask MDT about their permit process. MEPA is not their permit process. It's a piece, and it's a very brief piece because it's a checklist right now generally, and it only gets a little broader if there's going to be significant ramifications. The other thing I'll just mention is if you do decide to pass this piece of legislation, I would encourage you to narrow the scope because as was some of the proponents said, if it's existing roads through existing right-of-ways that don't make infrastructure changes, perhaps you can do an exemption. But if you're doing a major have to do new stream crossings and extensively change the nature of the road and potentially impact things like wetlands and other things, it makes sense to stop, plan, and let the public participate and have the right to know what's going on. Thank you.